We have my friend, David Parker here. No, David's been a friend for a long time, and I met him in passing a couple of times in the early 80s, but I met him, we were actually invited to a thing called the Prophets at, I'm not going to say anything about it, of the Round Table, and which it was really weird to be invited to that. I didn't know why I was there. I can understand why everybody else was there, but I couldn't, although I was able to bring some levity to the situation. But since that time, we've gotten to know each other very well. David and his family have been very, very gracious to me. When I stepped down from the senior pastor of Anaheim, David made it a point to call me every day for a year. Every week for a year, just to see how I was doing. And it seemed like every day. Like I said, he's been sick. And part of that, by the way, has affected his memory. And so if he tells you any stories about me, he gets them mixed up all the time and puts me in a story that I don't belong in. So don't listen to that. It was the first Thanksgiving that I had without my family. And they invited me to join them and their family. They have 4 lovely children. And we had a wonderful time. And the thing I always remember about it, besides the great food and the great friendship, is that the football. We got to watch football all the time. And when we weren't watching football, we were watching basketball. And, a lot of families have gotten into this tradition with Thanksgiving of giving thanks. and I've been at those places, and they've turned the TV off during Thanksgiving. And so I was very fortunate to spend my weekend with them where the TV was never turned off and every sport of every nature and kind was displayed. And so I've never forgot that. That really warmed my heart. So he's a phenomenal pastor, a great, great leader, a wonderful Bible teacher, and a lovely friend.
The first time we ever met, he's referring to this Round Table of the Prophets event, and this was at this place. They had a basketball court, and there was a few of us thought we would shoot a few hoops, and so I come out, and my legs are quite thin, and Carl saw me in my shorts and said, "I didn't know you had polio as a child." I didn't hardly know him. That's what he said. Amazing that we're friends. It really is. But you are dear to me in spite of all of that. I've spent the last year fighting cancer. I have a really rare, kind of aggressive form of cancer. And then I had a stroke 2 months ago, which they're not sure if is related to the cancer or not. And so I'm just really hard to kill. That's like the obvious thing. But I spent the last year in, treatment centers and in waiting rooms full of a lot of pain. People in a lot of pain. And the humor in those environments is really interesting and really important, because I think that in terms of the downward slide of disease, in terms of taking life, I think when you lose your sense of humor, that's really a bad sign, And so in these waiting rooms, full of people who, are on that journey, the humor is funny. So here's a joke from the last year. So this guy his doctor calls him after a whole battery of tests and tells him, "I've got bad news for you and very bad news." The man says, "Oh man, give me the bad news first." He says, "Well, the tests show that you have 2 days to live." The man says, "What?" He says, "What could be the very bad news?" "Well, my office forgot to call you day before yesterday." So I turned 61 at the end of July. Carl sent me a birthday card, really kind of him. On the front it said, "Inside is a message from God." And I opened it up and it said, "See you soon." You wish you would have. You wish you would have. You wish you had sent that card. You know, one of the results, I don't know if it's from an increased sensitivity to suffering or it's an side effect of chemotherapy, but I'm a big crybaby now. I mean, I would always, you know, I could, it wasn't like I'm not a person who never cried, you know, I certainly could cry, but now I cry at everything. You know, I don't know if any of you can relate. I cry at commercials. When I know I'm being manipulated for financial gain, I still cry. You know, when Ren, my granddaughter, and I are watching a Disney movie, you know, I'll cry. The other day I was watching ESPN, which I assume as a man should be a cry-free zone. You know, like the only thing worth crying about is like, you know, the Dodgers losing or something. But so I'm watching ESPN, and it was one of those shows where they show these little mini documentaries. And they were telling the story of this young 27-year-old race car driver who was in a terrible crash in a race, and he was kept alive for a few days after that crash because he'd signed the back of his driver's license to make himself an organ donor. And the documentary was really about his parents and his fiance and his sister. And at first, after the crash, when you know they were told they were going to keep his body alive for a few days, they were kind of horrified by it and thought, oh, you know, this is. But then they realized there was something here. So they spent 2 days in his room, lying on his bed, talking to him, just telling him everything they wanted him to know. Then his organs were harvested, and I think 6 or 7 people received a donation of life, really, from that sacrifice. And his fiance, who just loved him dearly, she wrote to every single one of the people who'd received that donation, and she just wanted them to know something about him because she loved him, and he was a kind and generous and humble guy, and she just wanted them to know who was behind what they'd received. She received a really lovely, you know, thank you reply from every one of them. But one of them, the man, about a 60-year-old man, had received his heart as a heart transplant, a long-time Army veteran, and was in a desperate place, received this man's heart. He wrote back in a kind of really thoughtful way and just expressed how grateful he was and how willing he was to meet with them. So they decided to go and meet this man. And they traveled there, and the camera crew is with them on the road or on the journey as they're pulling up the house. And right before they get there, they all have second thoughts, like maybe this wasn't a good idea. Like, you know, they were about a year into the aftermath, and maybe this just reopens maybe this was a bad idea. And so they stop in front of the house, and they're getting out of the car, and the guy comes out of the front door, this man. And he stands there, and the mother is the first to reach him, and she just hugs him and buries her head in his chest and listens to the heartbeat of her son. Then the fiance comes and slips her hand in onto his chest to feel that heartbeat. And it's a story that, you know, as stories do, makes us feel something and think something, maybe even act in some way. But it's about the power of love and the depth of grief and incomprehensibility of loss, really, in the face of love. And stories are powerful like that, to make us think and feel and maybe sometimes act. And so that's why there are a lot of stories in the Bible, because they do that. And in the Old Testament, you know, which all of the key figures use story in the Old Testament, but some of the stories, like the stories that Moses either, you know, wrote down or had written down in the first 5 books of the Bible, many of those stories are like, you know, they're explanations. They're stories as explanations. They're trying to explain the way things are, the reality of how, you know, the people of Israel found life in the when they had it. And so they threw up a window and let light in. And some of the stories, like in the Judges, someone like Samson tells stories, and they're riddles, and they're meant to confound and really embarrass the enemies of Israel. They're meant to kind of humiliate them, provoke them, because it was in some sense like the only resistance that was really being offered at that time. And so, the prophets will tell stories, and those stories, unlike Moses' stories, which were largely explanational, or Samson's stories, which were provocations, and the prophets tell stories that are confrontations. They tell stories that expose us in some way. They expose our predicament or our peril. Most famously, that story of Nathan that he tells to David, and David's the guy in the story. He's the bad guy. He doesn't see it coming, because stories have that ability to kind of slip through our defenses and squeeze truth in, maybe. So it's not surprising then that Jesus uses stories. What is a little bit surprising is that Jesus' stories are different. They're not windows, they're not tests, they're not usually even confrontations. They're doorways. They open a doorway to actually encounter truth and enter into truth and be changed by truth. That's kind of the unique nature of how Jesus uses stories. And because Jesus uses stories in such a committed way, in such a determined way, in such a purposeful way, that I'd love just to look at a passage in the Gospels where Jesus offers some explanation for why he does that, and from that hopefully draw out some of the open doors that are there for us in these stories of Jesus. So I'm going to read from Matthew chapter 12, the end of Matthew chapter 12, and through the first half of Matthew 13. The reason that I'm reading at the end of chapter 12 is that to me it's really an important context for what follows in chapter 13, where we actually encounter this parable of the sower and Jesus' explanation of why he teaches in stories. So Matthew 12, verse 46, it goes like this: While Jesus was still talking to the crowd, his mother and brothers stood outside wanting to speak to him. Someone told him, "Your mother and brothers are standing outside wanting to speak to you." He replied to him, "Who is my mother and who are my brothers?" Pointing to his disciples, he said, "Here are my mother and my brothers. For whoever does the will of my Father in heaven is my brother and sister and mother." That same day, Jesus went out of the house and sat by the lake. Such large crowds gathered around him that he got into a boat and sat in it while the people stood on the shore. That he told them many things in parables, saying, "A farmer went out to sow his seed. As he was scattering the seed, some fell along the path, and the birds came and ate it up. Some fell on rocky places where it did not have much soil. It sprang up quickly because the soil was shallow. But when the sun came up, the plants were scorched, and they withered because they had no root. Other seed fell on thorns, among thorns, which grew up and choked the plant. Still other seed fell on good soil, where it produced a crop 160 or 30 times what was sown. He who has ears, let him hear." The disciples came to him and asked, "Why do you speak to the people in parables?" He replied, "The knowledge of the secrets of the kingdom of heaven has been given to you, but not to them. Whoever has will be given more, and he will have an abundance. Whoever does not have, even what he has, will be taken from him. This is why I speak to them in parables. Though seeing, they do not see. Though hearing, they do not hear or understand. In them is fulfilled the prophecy of Isaiah. You will be ever hearing, but never understanding. You will be ever seeing, but never perceiving. For this people's heart has become calloused. They hardly hear with their ears, and they have closed their eyes. Otherwise they might see with their eyes, hear with their ears, understand with their hearts, and turn, and I would heal them. Blessed are your eyes because they see, and your ears because they hear. For I tell you the truth, many prophets and righteous men longed to see what you see, but did not see it, longed to hear what you hear, but did not hear it. Listen then to what the parable of the sower means. When anyone hears the message about the kingdom and does not understand it, the evil one comes and snatches away what was sown in his heart. This is the seed sown along the path. The one who received the seed that fell on the rocky places is the man who hears the word and at once receives it with joy. But since he has no root, he lasts only a short time. When trouble or persecution comes because of the word, he quickly falls away. The one who received the seed that fell among the thorns is the man who hears the word, but the worries of this life and the deceitfulness of wealth choke it, making it unfruitful. But the one who received the seed that fell on good soil is the man who hears the word and understands it. He produces a crop yielding 160 or 30 times what was sown. The end of chapter 12, Jesus does this thing that Jesus does. And that is he spins things. He alters the perception of people in terms of how things really are. He is speaking to a crowd, and his Mother Mary and his younger siblings arrive. And because in the Jewish world, and in fact most worlds, we would consider the circle of our nuclear family, of our blood relations, of those that we share some DNA sequence with, a higher priority than everyone else. So the assumption was Jesus' mother and his brothers are here. Jesus should shut down speaking to the people he's speaking to and go and speak to them. Like that would be the higher priority. That was the expectation. That's why it was like, Jesus, didn't you notice they're here? Like you need to go take care of that. And Jesus shocks them by saying, who is my mother and brothers? Right? It's like, whoa. And then he says, it is not the circle of your blood relationships that are the highest priority. That's not the kind of strongest bond. He basically redirects this sense of understanding, at least from God's perspective, about what makes us family, that it's not simply that shared kind of history or heritage. This is a major problem for the people of Israel that he's dealing with. Like their assumption is that this history and heritage they have, even their racial whatever, has purity, has made them the people of God. And Jesus completely rejects that. And he says, in fact, it is your direction, it is your path, it is those who are doing the will of the Father who are my sister and brother and mother. Like, it's shocking. So he's redefining. He's not saying to us that, wow, your marriage isn't important, or your children or your grandchildren. Those are deeply important things. But there is something that we open our heart to wider that has to do with this journey that we're on, the direction that we're headed, the path that we take, and those that we're sharing that with. Of course, we want our blood family, our blood relationships to be sharing that path as much as anybody, probably more. But it is that sense of direction that is the issue. And so now we come to chapter 13, and he tells a story that's basically about how do you get on that direction, that path, where we're doing the will of the Father in heaven. And he says that the basic problem that people have is not a lack of information, a lack of direction, a lack of commands towards the destination, that they don't hear, they don't see, they don't understand. And he goes, I long that they would, so that they would turn that direction and I would heal them. So he's talking about his use of story as a doorway of change, as a redirection of life. And it's that I want to kind of concentrate on with you for a few minutes. I know I had notes passed out, which apparently is like a really novel thing here. Like that's never ever even like crossed anyone's mind here, that it might be a good thing to help people kind of track along with the ideas that you're giving if they're written down. Like it's not a test, it's not a trick, the notes aren't. They're just a tool. They have a few blanks to actually like write something in, because it's a well-proven fact that anything that we're here and considering, if we write it down, we'll remember it 10 times longer than otherwise. So that means instead of forgetting what I say in 2 minutes, it might be 20 minutes. I like that. I like my odds better that way. So if you'd go along, where's your notes? Get your pen out. Okay. Okay.
Tell them to bring the pens next week.
Yeah, you better bring your pens next week because there's going to be like lots of notes and lots of blanks. Yes. Okay. Throughout the Bible, storytelling is used as a way to communicate truth through explanation, confrontation, sometimes even provocation. All the voices of the Old Testament, Moses, the prophets, the judges, the psalmists, use storytelling as a critical communication tool. But no one in the Bible uses storytelling more extensively or effectively than Jesus. Jesus was uniquely committed to storytelling as the primary way he shaped and communicated his message. We call Jesus' stories parables because they use everyday life to illustrate deeper truths about God, his activity in the world, and the choices we face. For Jesus, these stories were never mere explanations of spiritual reality or a means to convince or convict people of moral truth. Jesus told stories to open doors for people to know and experience God and life differently. As such, they were invitations, and by them we are welcome, first of all, to take initiative and investigate. The thing that's obvious about using stories as a primary means of communicating your message is that they require people to ask, what does that mean? Like you're telling this story that's very familiar to us, the story of the sower. Everyone in Israel, an agrarian society, everyone understood what sowing was like and that it was done by hand often, by groups of people sharing that experience together, and that this is exactly what took place in that broadcasting of the seed as efficiently and effectively as you could. This is what took place. So it's very real to life. And this is the important thing about stories, right? Because people get up like, is it real life or is it real to life? Well, most of Jesus' stories are real to life. Like, he's not thinking of like a specific guy. Like I just saw down the street. No, he's telling a story that allows us to identify in a real-to-life way with what's going on, but it has a deeper meaning, that there's more there. So it requires a question, right, in our heart. It requires this ask, this, what's that about? And it requires us to take some initiative, maybe even some investigation to find out what it's about. This is so like important to me. I lead this church and have for 24 years. I don't now because I'm pastor emeritus, which I'm not exactly sure what that means, but I think it means that I get a lot of credit and don't have to work for it or something. I don't know. I like it, but the church that we've led in the high desert of Northeast LA County is a very diverse, very interesting. We have just a deep heart for the poor. We're a church of the poor. We don't have a ministry of the poor to the poor so much as we are of the poor. So, a third of our church of many thousands of people comes from a hardcore addiction background, crystal meth, heroin. We have this really mixed up thing. So I brought a guy who's an urban missionary, a very expert on kind of urban church, and he came and spoke one time, and he said, "Well, David, you have something here that he goes, I've seen a lot of things. I've never seen that. Diversity in America, like the churches that are diverse, a very small percentage of churches, and diversity is defined by less than 80% majority culture. So if you have 21% of people who are different than the majority, you're a diverse church in America. We have about 50, 55, 45, something like that. And yeah, but that's not the interesting thing. It's not that diversity. The real hard, challenging diversity, like churches who are diverse, tend to fall into class distinctions, like everyone's poor, everyone's middle class, everyone's, wealthy. But we have a church that is diverse that way. Lots of poor people, lots of middle class people, not very many well-off people, but But it's really interesting that way, And so, I don't know why I got off on that story now. I'm trying to think now. Why did I go telling that story? There was a point to it. I know why. Okay, the expectation I think that people have about God or about church is that it just kind of downloads stuff to you. Like, here's what you need to know. Here's what you need to believe. Believe it. You're not believing it good enough. And if you work with people who are addicts, like sometimes they'll just substitute a dependency on drugs for that dependency. That you just tell me and I'll do it. That's what I'll accept. No. Like Jesus, the use of stories is so clear indicator that God is like uninterested in that kind of relationship with you. He's uninterested in a download relationship with you where he simply tells you what to do or what to believe and you do it. There's something much more dynamic. There's something much more like discovery-oriented about the way that Jesus is doing it that is inviting you to own it, not simply receive it, but to own it, for it to become yours, not just his. And so this idea that God doesn't want a bunch of puppets or pets, but again, back to the family, he wants brothers and sisters and mothers and fathers, and that requires something much more than, well, I just heard it and I believe it, and I that kind of thing. That it involves I gotta get up out of myself. The doorway to change. If it was just more kind of information or more direction that people needed to change, we would have mastered that a long time ago. We live in terribly polarized time on so many levels. And I don't know about you, if you probably have your convictions, I have mine, and I think people that don't have mine are really dumb and wrong, and I'd like to argue them out. I'd like to show them how dumb and wrong they are. It doesn't work. Have you ever noticed that? That an additional bulk of facts does not change things, because the door of changing your perspective unlocks from the inside. It does not unlock because I have the key. My argument is so good. Here, I'll open that for you. It will work. And so Jesus tells stories to help people unlock from the inside, that they would actually start seeing instead of never perceiving, that they'd actually start hearing instead of never understanding. And that happens because we engage, because we don't end up in that place where we're calloused, where we think, and it's not callous. I think some people read this parable almost like in a moralistic way, or you're just so calloused by sin or whatever. No, Jesus is talking to a bunch of people who think they know God. Like they got God figured out. He's contained by all the laws that they, have. And yet Jesus tells them, you don't know him at all. Like you've forgotten the most important things, love, justice, mercy. So there's this disconnect between people being closed to what they don't know so Jesus is trying to help them to open up to what they don't know, just like he tries to help us. Like you need to soften up. You need to, the key thing about, initiate and investigate is, wow, there's something here that I don't know that Jesus could help me find, right? And I can actually move that direction by asking a few questions. I wasn't raised in a religious environment at all. I grew up in a really secular, broken kind of background. A lot of violence, a lot of, And when I prayed my first prayer, I was, I think, first year of university. It was the Jesus movement. A bunch of my friends started becoming religious, becoming Christians. I thought that was really a bad idea, especially my girlfriend. I thought, suddenly she was like, Jesus was more important than me. That really ticked me off. Now she's my wife of 43 years. She's sitting there. But But the reality was that I started reading the Bible so I could talk her and other friends out of their faith. I thought it was so ridiculous. This is a total tangent, but I'll tell you this anyway. I was so arrogant. I was, in university, thought I was really smart and thought, well, I got to figure out Christianity in a matter of days. So I went and bought a Bible and thought, I don't need to start at the beginning. I'll just jump in there and figure this thing out. So I started reading for the very first time in the Bible in Leviticus. That's what I did. It just increased my sense of urgency to deliver them. But my very first prayer was one thing I couldn't get past was the Gospels. Like I met, like you heard about Jesus, I thought, well, he's hard to throw away. Like I don't know what to do with him, but he's so intriguing and interesting and winsome. I thought, this isn't what I thought. So I prayed my first prayer, God, if you're up there. Like many of you have probably done say, if you're up there, I'd really like to know. And if it has something to do with Jesus, I'd like to figure that out too. I mean, that's like, I don't know if that's even a crack in the door. I certainly didn't believe I'd hear any answer to that question. But I'll finish the story. The moment I finished that prayer, I was sitting on the bed. I was sitting on a bed in my bedroom in my mother's house. I felt embarrassed to be talking to myself. I prayed that prayer. I stood up, and it was like someone had punctured a hole in my chest. And I felt kind of a lifetime, short lifetime, but a lifetime of bitterness and anger and hurt and rage kind of just leak out of me. And I thought, oh no, it's true. Initiate, investigate. We get so stuck. We do. We get so, I got, it's like I've been handed the body of truth and I'm going to defend it till I die. Like somehow like our journey of discovery is over at some point when we got filled in all the blanks. I don't think that's right. I think we're still filling in blanks. A couple more things and I'll be fast. Jesus told stories to open doors for people to know and experience God and life differently. As such, they're invitations, and by them we're welcome to identify ourselves personally with the truth. This is really key for the parables, that you got to identify. Like no understanding is going to come. No life is going to come until you plant your feet in them. So in the parable of the sower, it's really obvious. Who are you? Are you the path, the hard path? Are you the rocky place? Are you among the thorns? Are you the good soil? Again, and let me just really underline this, because I think people tend to think Jesus is just delivering spiritual reality, like a window. Here's the reality. I know a lot of people interpret this parable like, well, these are the different kind of people there are. And like your path, sorry. It's like, that's just the way the cards were dealt or whatever. And we're just, here go to leadership center. We're just looking for the good soil people, like that's a category of human beings. I don't think that's at all what Jesus is doing. I think in listening to the story, you're meant to identify both with the bad and the good. Like I could be that for sure. I guarantee you the disciples were sitting around thinking, yeah, a year and a half I left my business and my home and my family, and I sleep rough with you, Jesus, on rocks and dirt, and yeah, maybe the concerns of this world and the deceitfulness of wealth is trying to choke out the reason I'm fine. Maybe I could be that guy. Even at this moment, I could be that guy. That's life. Like I could be that guy. I could be that guy that any little cost, any little problem is too much for me, so I throw away my faith and run away scared. I could be that guy. But I also could be the good soil. I could be that person. And for the disciples, of course, Jesus intended for them also to identify with the sower. You could be that person. You're going to be that person. And you better know that, and this is the classic thing for anyone who wants to share life or try to bring change to others, that some people it's going to bounce off of them like it was nothing. And other people are going to be real excited and last about a week. And some people are just going to be, you can just watch it. They're just, the other things of life just choke it out of them. And it's so heartbreaking. And then there'll be some who really get it. And the return of what they multiply will be different. But if you don't have that perspective as someone trying to bring change or do something good, you will get so discouraged, so depressed by that variety of responses that you'll want to quit. So they had to at some point jump into the parable and say, I identify with the sower. I identify with that person. That's where the doorway is. But it's got to be personal, right? And so, yeah, it has to be personal. It has to be, I see me there. And I could be in any of these spots. Where do I want to be? There, it comes back again to that sense of choice. You know, what do I really, let him who has ears hear, Jesus says. Like, which of these do you prefer? I'm closer to the end of my life than the beginning for sure. And they tell me, you know, like when I was first diagnosed with this cancer, the average lifespan from diagnosis to death is 15 months, and I'm at 14 months right now, so I'm doing like really well, you know, but the next month could be problematic, you know, so, but I don't, you know, it's just whatever. But the truth is that when you're at the end of your life and when you're around people who are at the end of their life, they're not thinking, man, I wished I had bought that boat. They're just not. They're thinking, did my life make any difference? Does anybody care? Have I left anything behind? You know, these are like the relevant questions. This is what the parable of the sower is about. Like multiplying life. Like what did I do with what I was given? Did that make a difference? Did it mean something to someone else? Did I lift them up? Those are the issues, really, that it boils down to. And so Jesus is telling a parable saying, here's how you get there. You know, that direction of doing the will of your Father in heaven, you know, like you enter in this way by taking some initiative and investigating and identifying. Lastly, Jesus told stories to open doors for people. As such, they're invitations, and by them we are welcome to know God in life, not just ideas. To know God in life, not just ideas. This is fascinating, that the parables all involve living, and they're not abstractions. Even when Jesus teaches with abstractions, like the Sermon on the Mount, you know, blessed are the poor in spirit, theirs is the kingdom of heaven. That's an abstraction, right? But like, who's the poor in spirit? It requires almost the exact same process that parables do. Like, what does that mean to be poor in spirit? And do I identify with that, to be poor in spirit? And so what the parables do by always kind of contexting, knowing God and working this out in life is coming up against the thing that happens. You didn't intend for it to happen. You know, like it certainly wasn't God's intent to happen, but somehow, even when we make a start kind of relationally in life, knowing God, pretty soon we're adding all the ideas about God. And pretty soon all the ideas about God define what we think we know about God and who God is. And somehow then there's this exchange where I'm not knowing God like living in life as much as I'm knowing God because I have this collection of ideas about him. So the people of Israel, you know, they had some, you know, over 1,000, 1,100 something laws in the Old Testament. And I thought those were the ideas that define their knowledge of God. And again, referring back to Jesus' rebuke of that, saying, you know, you even apply kind of the littlest law. Not apply the littlest law. You know, they had not only the laws of the Old Covenant, but then they had the teachers and the scribes and the scholars, you know, basically multiplied the law to kind of make it more, you know, because the laws, some of the laws fairly general, like how does it apply in a specific situation? So they multiplied the law in the 40,000 range. So now I got this great big mound of ideas about God. one of two things tends to happen with that. One of them is that you reject God. The God of ideas is ultimately rejected by lots of people. Even fervent, zealous people who believed all the ideas. The inability to hold on to those ideas or work all of those ideas out ultimately becomes a cause to reject those ideas. So oftentimes people will reject God when he becomes this mass of ideas, or they will be crushed by those ideas. And they will still be walking and talking and looking like they're following God, but they are crushed by inside. They're not living out the reality of any of those things. That Jesus, talked about truth setting us free, being a liberating kind of driving force in life. That is lost when God becomes all about ideas. We fight about ideas. We kill about ideas. And Jesus couches the truth about God and his interaction with the world and the choices we face in real life. And says that this is the arena where it happens, is in real life. So we believe things like, ideas like, God is merciful, right? Because of the gospel, Jesus' sacrifice. And yet if that's an idea that we're not experiencing for ourselves, that God is merciful, that we're not offering to others, not as an idea, but as mercy to others. We'll never know God in life, right? We believe that Jesus heals. But if that remains an idea, if I never lay my hands on a sick person in compassion and wanting to bring comfort or help to them, then it will ever remain just an idea I have about God. I believe that God loves the poor deeply. And yet, if my life is not entangled with the poor in any significant way, then that idea about God just simply remains an idea. Our church occupies kind of a corner. We bought a shopping center a long time ago and then more land. And so we're this kind of big campus on the corner. Right across the street from us on the opposite corner is just a little tiny, fairly hard scrabble church building that has a hardcore Seventh-day Adventist church in it. And, if you're a hardcore Seventh-day Adventist, then of course you believe that anyone who doesn't worship on the Sabbath is going to hell, on Friday night sundown to Saturday night sundown. And so this lady in our church wandered over there, God bless her, got involved with them. And one day she came back to talk to me and she said, "Pastor, don't you feel terrible about leading all those people at the Vineyard to hell?" I said, "I do feel terrible about that." Please do fill in the blanks. You're not doing it on Saturday. I said, "Well, we have a Saturday night service. Does that count?" She says, "No, it's after sundown." So, it's like, I know where all this conversation is going, but then for her sake, I said, "Please tell me that you don't believe in a God who looks at thousands of people, many of them from the most kind of broken background of life, and thinks, wow, they're trying real hard, and they have some kind of genuine reach for me, but they got the day wrong, so go to hell." Is that the God that you believe in? Because you can believe in that kind of God with ideas, but you can't believe in that kind of God knowing him in life, right? That you can't. So the parables, they did this wonderful thing of forcing us to think about life and not about ideas. I got to think about walking through the plowed rows and thinking, I'm not just planting the seeds one by one in the rows so that I'm broadcasting. I'm giving my heart away, my concern away, how I treat people. That's what it's ultimately, right? In the parable, it's kind of about the fruitfulness has to do with fulfilling the great commandment. Love God, love your neighbors. How do you treat people? Like, it's not possible to know God and hate your brother, John says. It's just that belongs to the realm of knowing God as an idea. But in life, yeah. So, open doors. I don't know what doors God's trying to open for you. I know I'm in my 60s. I know I have a dreadful diagnosis of my health. I know I spent 45 years following Jesus. I know I don't want to walk a day further with a calloused heart and a closed mind and not learning more from Jesus, what God's really like and what my place is in the world and what choices I face. Would you stand up together with me and we're going to pray. January, thanks for coming back. Okay. Here's how I like to do it. When Paul's in Athens, in Acts 17, and he says the basic point of life, we have our life when and where we have it. This is kind of a lovely hand of life, really, that you live in Orange County in 2017, and whatever fires, whatever earthquakes, whatever challenges, that this is where we have life today. And Paul says we have life when and where we have it by God's design, that we might reach for him and find him, because he's not very far from every one of us. And so I like to respond to God by reaching for him. And if today, like in your life, maybe there's something that wants to unlock from the inside. Maybe there's a sense of, wow, there's stuff for me to discover, stuff that I don't know that Jesus has for me, that I need to open up my heart to. I don't know what that might be specifically with you, but I just know there are those moments where we need to turn the key from the inside. And if today's one of those moments, you're just wanting, Lord, I want to open up more to what you have for me, what you want me to know and do, then just put your hand up with me. Just reach out, because God is near to us, near to every one of us, to come in and as we turn to him to heal us, to make us who we're supposed to be, to fill our heart with good things. Lord, we reach for you together. We ask, Lord, you would touch our life. We ask for your truth that's liberating and courageous and compassionate and kind and makes us lovers of our neighbors as well as God, that truth would just swell in our heart, would just fill the empty places and the hard places, the disappointed places. God, come today. Come with hope. Come with blessing and strength. Come. In Jesus' name we ask it.
This is the kind of thing that we need to take deep, and it can't be done in a few minutes. There are ideas and there are thoughts and there are teachings that come that we just need to go deeper with. And I think David spoke profoundly about some really simple and relevant truths. This is where we want to be. Real, authentic followers of Jesus who know his voice and hear his voice and follow.